Welcome, everyone who's joining, and thank you for being here on International Design Day. It is a global initiative established in 1995 by the International Council of Design, also known as ICoD, celebrated every April 27th, and dedicated to making the case for design's essential role in society, culture, and the human experience. Each year, ICoD invites a member organization to host the day and shape its theme. And in 2026, that honor belongs to SEGD, the Society for Experiential Graphic Design. This year, the theme is the spaces in between, an invitation to look beyond what we make and towards the moments where design quietly shapes how people relate to each other, where strangers become communities, and where belonging is built. The conversations you're about to hear come from designers and leaders whose work live in exactly these spaces. So we're so glad that you're joining us. And I'm Cybelle Jones, CEO of SEGD, a multidisciplinary global community of professionals who design experiences that connect people to place. So the spaces in between is not just a theme for us, it's kind of at the heart of everything we do. And it's my real privilege to introduce someone who's just stepped into one of the most significant leadership roles in American design, probably in international design as well, and who brings to it nearly 4 decades of experience building spaces where people belong. So I'll give a little bio to our guest. Our guest today is the newly appointed executive president and CEO of AIA, the American Institute of Architects, an organization that represents nearly 100,000 architects across the country and around the world. Carol Wedge, FAIA, spent 37 years at Shepley Bulfinch, one of the country's most storied architecture firms, where she began in the mailroom. I couldn't believe it. I had to go double check that and rose to become CEO. During that time, she designed libraries, universities, and cultural institutions across the country, earning a reputation as a champion of people-centered design, equity, and the spaces where communities come together. She is the 2020 recipient of AIA's Edward C. Kemper Award for Distinguished Service to the Profession. She holds 3 honorary doctorates and was inducted into the Interior Design Hall of Fame. She describes herself charmingly, I love this, as a pollinator. I always call myself a connector. I guess that's kind of a pollinator. Someone whose job is to cross-connect ideas, people, and institutions in ways that create something that neither could produce alone. I love that. And as AIA opens its reimagined global campus for architecture and design in Washington, D.C., a member-focused net zero adaptive renovation, Carol arrives at a genuinely pivotal moment for the profession. So, Carol, welcome. So glad to see you here. And I was told all about Carol I think, right as she was getting the new position. And so it's really just wonderful to get to chat. So,
Thank you for inviting me.
yeah, it's great. And I know you're very busy, but we snuck in a little bit of time to talk about this important theme, which I think also crosses really well into the work that you're doing and trying to do at AIA. So I have to ask, as someone who's spent a long time designing spaces where people learn and gather and find each other, when you heard of this theme, the spaces in between, what does that mean to you through your architects and design leaders' mind?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind for me was the idea of third space. And there's been quite a few books written about it. And I think that came from working on a lot of libraries in my career at Shepley, where people started to talk about the library when it wasn't completely centered on containing books, was creating this very valuable community place for people. And I
Yeah.
also think it's related in some crazy way to the explosion of coffee shops and cafes in our world. It's sort of amazing. We had some of that before, but I think that people have been looking for community, a place where they can be alone together. I love that concept.
Yeah.
That you would go to a quiet reading room in a public library to be around other humans, but you're not actually talking to them. You're in community with them. So for me, that was what I first thought of.
Yeah, I love that. I just read that Barnes and Noble's making a huge comeback. They just bought built another great space in downtown DC. They have a great store in Georgetown. And I remember when my girls were young, they had a really fun, like poo themed place to read, and they would call it the library. I mean, we
It kind
also
of
went
was.
to we also went to the library, but I think those kinds of spaces where you could just be like a mom on a really, you know, dreary day and just hang or I would do the same thing with the museums, like just, not in DC it's great cuz they're free. You could just
Yeah.
kind of like hang out in the rotunda. You didn't actually have to go and, like do
Well, and you
your
think of
drive.
those spaces as belonging to everyone. I think that's what I love about them is that they kind of cross all of our aspects of community, and maybe, sort of the retail piece is part of it. But um, I also love the idea that we used in some of our library work of like being able to have a prospect. And I think of a lot of those Barnes as Nobles as being like open in the middle, and you could be up
Right.
on a balcony, or the children's room is usually upstairs, tucked in a back corner. So it feels kind of quiet and safe. And so some of those places feel like a place of retreat. Um, and it isn't. The other thing I thought of was like overlapping space and how we think about. Certainly, my husband Jerry and I have been serial renovators of our homes, but the spaces have become more and more overlapped. So that it's, you have one room that's a little bit the kitchen, a little bit dining, a little bit hanging out, doing homework, doing your email, like the sort of blurry, almost continuum of space historically would have been thought of as like a kitchen and a dining room and a family room or a study. And now they're all this kind of one continuum. And that's
Yeah.
become really popular in residential design. So I think that's
Yeah.
kind of interesting. Like the in-betweenness of it, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, what is it about the damn kitchen? Like, I have an older daughter who just moved home, and she works from home and has plopped herself at the kitchen
Counter.
counter, and I can't move her, but we just love to be in those interstitial spaces. It's like we don't wanna miss out on the action. I think it's the same thing of like, yeah, you could read a book at home, but if you're sitting in the library, you can kinda, like, people watch and not feel like, like you need to do a load of laundry or something like that. So, yeah,
Yeah, I love that.
definitely.
I
Yeah.
love that
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. So you're building talk about a serial renovator. Did you take the job at AIA just so you could, like, finish the headquarters?
Well,
You're like, "I haven't done
actually,
enough renovations."
it's so funny because my first week was governance week when they opened the building and welcomed people, and had a big celebration, and we're able to show people the building, and the courtyard isn't quite done, and especially because it's landscape and it was December headed into winter, so it'll be done by the fall, and also be a great space in between kind of the urban grid of Washington and the building, which is a little bit like an embrace, so it's almost like this protected courtyard. But I feel very lucky to surf the backside of a renovation. So Stephen Ayers and Terry Stewart at AIA and all the previous AIA
Mm.
boards, it was a long time coming. So
Yeah.
I almost feel like I got a gift of a completed building. um,
Yeah.
but it's really an interesting space because it kind of flips the narrative, I think, kind of generational. When it was built in the 70s, I think we were more formal as a culture, a little more hierarchical, a little more office centric. Um, so I really, really applaud the folks who've been involved because it creates a very public building. It's very welcoming. So my first thing to your listeners is if you're in DC, you're welcome to visit us and we'd love to show you around. But there's a new gallery and there's a new shop that are both accessible from the street. So you don't have to come into the formal headquarters. There's a coffee shop that's open to the public. So I've been in there at the coffee shop buying my coffee when someone will come in and say, "Oh, is this public?" And it's, "Yes, it is. Welcome. Please come in."
Mm.
So the space itself is really designed to convene people and have events and celebrations, but encourage people to come understand what design is, what architecture is. Last Monday, actually, we had the preschoolers from across the street come and we read books about
Ah.
architecture. It was great. And the AA team did an awesome job of setting up the furniture and having, Legos and snacks and balloons. And but it started to inhabit the space, and it felt really great.
That's great. So I want to talk about the culture that this redesign, and I know you weren't a part of the redesign, but I have been reading a lot about you, and it seems that it does reflect the culture that you're hoping to bring. And as someone who studied architecture, I know that architects can be or feel to the general populace off-putting, or maybe they're elevated, a little bit intimidating. And just as the subject matter, right? We don't teach people necessarily about architecture when you're a kid growing up. What do you hope that this new campus is able to achieve, and the relationship of your organization with the general public? I mean, you're right smack dab, near
Yeah,
all
well,
the
it's
stuff going on
interesting.
in DC.
We were at a meeting with alliance organizations, NCARB and NAB and ACSA and NOMA and the AAS students. And we were ideating, like, what could we do? What could we do? And I said, wouldn't it be cool if every eighth grader that came to Washington, D.C. came to the headquarters building and got to learn a little bit about architecture or got to learn a little bit about making things? Um, so my vision is it's a place that people want to stop by and see what's going on and get engaged in design. And I read a great article about you shouldn't ask students or children what they want to be when they grow up. You should ask them what they like to do. And if you talk to architects, they liked to make things. They were always drawing or um,
That was me.
there was this, yeah, there's a
Legos.
story, yeah, or the mid-century modern groovy Barbie townhouse was my generation, and a group of girls on our street would get together, and she and I would say, "You design the story and take the dolls, we'll design the house."
Yeah.
And the 2 of us ended up architects. So if someone said, "I
Wow.
liked to play Barbies and design the house that Barbie lived in," um, I think it's the idea of making things and sort of the fun of creation, whether you're making, a fort outside or, designing a Barbie house or playing with Legos or playing with Minecraft. I think connecting those dots, and I feel kind of a responsibility at AA to expose people to art and design in a way that our public schools don't have nearly the art curriculum they used to
Yeah.
have. I think I took every art class, every museum class in the town I grew up in. And my children went to a great school system, but had photography and really not much more. So I think we're having to kind of reintroduce people to creativity and reintroduce people to design. And and I also love getting, young people on a construction site. Look at how this thing gets made. It's kind of a messy business.
Yeah.
It's remarkable, but it's kind of exciting. And so architects will tell you a story of like their parents were building a house or their neighbors was building a house or was a builder or sort of what was the thing that connected you to the idea of how these places get made. And I think introducing that makes them so much less intimidating. I
Yeah.
think architecture is a big word, you know
Yeah.
and not many people, there aren't that many of us. I was just doing the numbers from NCARB. There's 116,000 registered architects in the United States. That's
Wow.
not very many.
That's not, yeah.
So when you
Yeah.
think a student hasn't met an architect. So our K-12 program is really important to us. It's really important to facing the future and encouraging people to get involved. But you don't have to just be an architect. You could be an engineer, or you could be a plumber, or an electrician, or a
Right. Or lighting
contractor,
designer.
or a lighting designer, or an exhibit
Yeah.
designer,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or an interior
Yeah.
designer. But I think the other thing we don't talk about much is how rewarding a design career is and how much people involved in design genuinely appreciate what they do every day. And that's an incredibly valuable aspect of our profession that I think we need to share more with
Yeah.
people much, much, much earlier in their academic career.
Oh my goodness, Carol, you put so much out that I want to like go back into. One is a memory that I never think about. My grandparents retired to Fort Myers, Florida, and it was a new development. And so there were probably 3 houses on the street under construction. I lived there every day after the people got done, because now you can't really go on construction sites, especially when you're a child. Like they don't want children. but I literally would walk through every room and try to imagine what it would look like when it was done. And I think that built my passion for architecture and design. And thinking about now, um, I completely agree. This is the most fun profession is to be in design because you're actually able to imagine and then see something come to life and see people interact. That's my favorite thing is to go back to
Yeah.
projects that I designed 20 years ago at the Smithsonian and people are still, they don't know anybody designed it, but they're still, experiencing that in those spaces. So,
Oh, I would do the same
yeah.
thing. I would drive my children by a project I worked on, and they're like, "Why do we go this way? It's so much longer." I was like, "'Cause I wanna see what people are doing." I wanna
Right.
drive by the building that I was part of. So, I
Yeah.
think telling that story, but also the sort of active making, I think with so much technology in our lives, the active making and model building and playing in a tactile way is a very human thing that I think we have to kind of make sure we don't lose to technology.
Yeah, and there's a whole thing about scale that is hard to when you're looking at a screen, do you really understand scale? I mean, that's why models and mock-ups and all those things are really, really still important to and also going to the theme of the spaces in between, even a three-dimensional, a 3D fly-through model doesn't give you that sense of space than you can get from actually, like, mocking things up, it's just completely different, and it's the spaces th those spaces in between that become the tension points, like, have you ever been somewhere where they just didn't design a thoroughfare wide enough for all the people that are going back and forth? You get into the lobby, it's great, but, the doorways or the security or whatever becomes the tension point, so, just thinking about that, and I also know that you're passionate about the who the spaces are for. So not only that it's a great profession and that, we should celebrate more people doing it, but thinking about, you know, equity and climate and who we're designing for and what the decisions that we're doing now and the things that we build now, how is that going to affect a community's well-being 50 years from now? Like I was saying that one of the other interviews of International Design Day is Lisa Dimitros, whose grandparents are Ray and Charles Eames. They even back then were talking about, the airport chair and how could it be adaptable and how could it, it wasn't a throwaway. They would actually design it so that it could be easily fixed. So, how do you think about that in your new role? There's a lot of challenges we face. How does architecture help to solve those problems?
Well, I think there's a couple aspects to that. I mean, I think the most fundamental is how we think about climate and how we think about how we're gonna have to respond to climate. So, um interestingly, I could have ended up a biologist as much as an architect. I think those first few biology classes scared me away with too much memorization. Um, but sort of understanding that our climate is going to change and we have to adapt to it and be very aware of it. And so, that is something that Ilya, our president this year, Azaroff, is talking a lot about. How do regenerative design processes allow us to imagine a future that we can learn more from the land that maybe needs to be healed or the community that might inhabit this space? So I think it's about imagining a world that has more extremes, more extreme weather, more extreme heat, more extreme flooding, and designing for those extremes before they get here. And
Mhm.
really engaging communities in the process so that they have um, they have an influence on it, they have agency in it, and it feels like we're in some ways, I think the way we design oh, integrating sustainability has kind of rebuilt respect for the lifelong, use of the building in a way, sort of how will it use energy or showing off that the new headquarters is net zero. There's also a guided tour to explain how is it net zero? Like, what does that mean exactly that it generates more energy than it creates? Um, but I think it's using different processes of engagement with communities and respect. And so I think some of the things that, are on our mind at AIA of like, what happens on the other side of this extreme weather? What happens after 2030? that was the goal, was to have all of us achieve a net zero energy by 2030. We've accomplished so much in the last 20 years that in fact, if you tap into that, it could give you hope for how much we could accomplish in the next 20 or next 50. And I think I'm a big proponent for density and understanding how much we're going to need the land to be natural and not build on it. And the cities that are more dense are actually more vibrant. They use less energy. They create community in a way that sprawling out across the landscape doesn't. But I think we're going to have to hold preserving land as more precious than we have in the past. And we've sort of thought of it as a commodity as opposed to more of a regenerative life source that we're going to need.
Yeah, it's amazing when you go back to a place after you haven't been there and you see the sprawl. Um, and I One of the first interviews I did for this series of International Design Day was, um, we brought up Jane Jacobs and thinking about just how that community, I love DC, and during COVID, seeing people like working from home, and it's great. But then I would say, yeah, but that restaurant that you love isn't going to make it if you don't go to work and, you know, get your lunch or have coffee or whatever. So there is that synergy of what's important about when we gather in spaces. And we know that loneliness is increasing, and how
Yeah.
can architecture and spaces and public gatherings really help that. And how, I mean, practically from an organization standpoint, how do you see your role or the organization of AIA in this kind of pushing for design for more connection and putting, and engaging community in that process?
I think one of the things is pretty remarkable about is a combination of um, providing education and convening so people can learn from each other. And so putting out stories and leaders and people who can inspire others to look at things in a different way. It's really in many ways what you do too, collecting designers and giving them a platform and showcasing them to the world. So in many ways, I feel like we're kind of the engine of the architects who are members to, give them an opportunity and a convening place to come together. Interestingly, post COVID, I feel like the need to gather is higher,
Yeah.
and people are more interested in re-engaging now that we're kind of on the other side of understanding that pandemic and what it did to us. And as convenient as it is to work from home and to be on a Zoom call, I'd much rather be having a real cup of coffee with you over a table and getting to know you better. And, sort of that that human to human interaction, I think, is incredibly valuable. And that's something that people come to AIA for.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's the support and the education, and how do you navigate change? How do you navigate a career? Um, if something's not working in your organization, who could you learn from? Who could you reach out to? So it's also a sort of multi-layered organization where our members get to know AIA at their local chapter first. And that local chapter, my local chapter, kind of raised me as an architect and exposed me to different opportunities. So it's that sort of local, state, and national alignment that's also
Mhm.
incredibly important.
Yeah, that peer to peer is really important. I became a member of SEGD. I met the then CEO, and I, got really close with some of my competitors. But, you can only talk to someone who does what you do. Like, nobody else understands what you do, right? And so that opportunity to really have those discussions that only people that are, you know, in the field of practice that you are can happen there. And
Yeah, and you must feel that. I'm sure you feel the same way, but I feel like AA in my profession has given me so much more than I've given it, in terms of relationships and
yeah,
connections and people I've learned from, or firms that I met along the way. I remember we went to the AA conference in San Antonio and knocked on Lake Flato's door and said,
they're
we wanted
so
to introduce
great.
ourselves. We wanted to introduce ourselves to you. You guys are
Oh.
so cool. You do such beautiful work." And they said, there's a tour, you're supposed to sign up. And we were like, "Oh, sorry." And they were, nice enough to show us around. And then we got to know the marketing director and we pursued a project together. And that's
Uh,
how the Austin Public Library happened. So it's funny that those incidences, so many of those kind of funny stories for me that led to opportunity came through AIA.
yeah, we worked on a project with Lake Flato also, and their work is so beautiful. They're really amazing. So for those of you listening, check
Yeah, go check
them
out their
out.
portfolio.
Yeah, go
Plus,
check
they
out,
were
yeah.
Firm of the Year and Gold Medal award winners. And I have a couple monographs from them in my office at
Oh,
AIA. So come visit. I'll show you. I'll show you them.
that's great. Yeah, so, going on back to you as a pollinator, and you mentioned, the what you can get from this community at AIA and talking about mentors, and I have my youngest daughter who said she never wanted to do what I did, ended up going to, interior architecture school, and she works at a design firm. And she's in London, and they're in office. I can see, based on the conversations, I'm not doing design anymore, how challenging it would be to be a young designer and working remote in your small apartment in a you know, big urban place where it's expensive to live and trying to learn the craft. What are you seeing, and how are you looking to support those emerging architects and what they really need,
Yeah.
to make their profession successful?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that. So I have a couple directions I think of it. One is, we lived through a kind of crazy transformative moment with the pandemic that I think we're still re-assimilating. And so I think we've been given new opportunities to have kind of balanced lives and flexibility and not think we have to um, commute every day if the work we need to do doesn't make sense. But I think so much of what you learn is through observation that it makes me really nervous if we think,
100%. Yes.
yeah, just like the observation and assimilation to how people behave. Or I think I learned how to read a room from going to meetings with the people I worked with who learned how to read the room. And then the drive home from the meeting, they'd say, "Did you notice what happened when so and so proposed something?" I was like, "Oh, no, I didn't notice that. I better get better at reading the room." Um, but I think firms are really trying to mix it up and honor that in-person learning is critical, but also that not everyone learns in the same way. And so I
Yeah.
think creating variety is really important. Creating relationships so that a young person joining a firm knows who their go-to couple people are to ask questions, to build a relationship. AIA has a flexible hybrid model, and we had a party for someone who was leaving, and the people that came in said, "Oh my gosh, that was so fun." And all I thought of was, we used to do that like every day when we all came to the office,
Right.
So we're
Yeah.
kicking around this idea of having like team Wednesdays or one Wednesday a month when we have lunch for everyone and people plan to come in and work together. I think the thing that works against you is if you bother to commute to an office and are on Zoom calls all day, and
Right.
then no one can walk up to you and talk to you. So I think it needs a little more choreography in that way. Um, but what I think I'm trying to do as my pollinator self is say to firms, you need to be hiring interns. You may not feel like you have a lot of extra need for interns, but you need to invest in the future. We can't not
Yeah.
hire them for 4 years. We can't just be completely focused on um, do I need this person as much as does this person need an introduction to our profession? And so create a pathway in for people. AIA is hiring interns this summer. We're having people apply now so that we can expose them just to the network of architecture. They might be doing, marketing for architecture this summer, um, but they'll get exposed to it and they'll get exposed to a network of people. And something as simple as there was a young man in our neighborhood who's looking for a job. He graduated from Pratt a while back, and I was going to visit a firm and we were on the phone talking, and he was asking for advice, and I was introducing the Boston Society of Architects. And I said, I'm going to a firm tomorrow. Why don't you just come shadow me and we'll
Aw.
go visit them together? And it's like what we used to do,
Yeah.
back before Zoom and Teams existed. We would say, just let this person shadow you for the day and observe how you do your job. So I
Yeah.
think reintroducing some of the more human connection aspects. Um, but, like, students can go to the AA conference for $35 for 3 days, or they can volunteer and go for free. So I think just, like, making things accessible,
Yeah.
um, and the other piece that I take from my kind of few months now visiting firms and visiting chapters is kind of redesigning the art of invitation. Someone said, "How come the young people don't come to our chapter meetings?" I was like, "Well, have you ever invited them? They might not even know you yet." So we started this whole conversation about when someone invites you to something, you take it seriously, you think of it differently. Um, and I don't know, I think we're going to have to redesign the art of invitation to create
Yeah.
these kind of broader membership organizations.
Yeah, and it's hard. I hear that a lot, that there will be new people that come to a conference and it looks like everybody knows everybody, and so how did they break through? And so constantly remind I every time we take a break, if I'm moderating, I say, go reach out to somebody who isn't with someone and take them with you to lunch or to the coffee break. And that's no,
Yeah.
it's great. And I do like this, you know, the conversation around curating the time that you're together. And I find that, we'll come into the office and then because one person isn't, on site, we'll all be on the Zoom. And I'm like, wait a minute, if we have six people and there's just one person, like we should take advantage of the time that we're together. And when we actually break out and sit around a table and grab a cup of coffee, we come up with the greatest ideas. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes they're kooky and sometimes like they're, going to change the next event that we have because we just had that time to, without necessarily an agenda, right? That's the coffee, hanging out by the coffee pot and, having those
Well, and
conversations.
I think it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, the space in between, right? The space in between, like a call and a call and a call, or a meeting and is like this human space, right? This
Yeah.
human space that you get to know people in a surprising way, or you interact, or find out what their sense of humor is like, or, you know, I think
Yeah.
it makes you a better collaborator if you know the people you're working with a little bit better.
Yeah. And Carol, before we go to our last lightning round of
Yeah.
questions, I do want to reiterate what you said about observation because I learned to be a design leader by being in spaces that I was the youngest, the most naive. My boss took me everywhere with him. And we often were, with architects and museum directors presenting, and I would kind of, take account of like, oh, well, that person uses humor. That person is really professorial. And through that, I was able to figure out, well, what am I?
Yeah.
How am I contributing in a way that's different from other people, but also where do I feel comfortable in myself so that when I speak, people actually listen because I'm feeling confident?
And I think that goes to, I think some coaching books would call that, what's your authentic voice? So I think for young people, if you feel like you're faking it, you probably are, and it's probably coming off as fake. But, that observation of how do you go through that process of finding your own voice in whatever that means. Um, and my reflection after I left Shepley after, a short 37 years, I said to my colleagues, "Oh my gosh, I should have been taking people with me everywhere I went for the last 5 years."
Yeah.
And we would get efficient and say, "Oh, Carol will go to that meeting and we'll go to this other meeting." I should have been taking younger people with me much more than I did. So
I
I'm trying to
know.
learn that lesson.
It's those billable hours or, oh, they should be back, but you can't teach that in the office. They have to just experience it tagging along. It's even just listening to phone calls. They learn a lot hearing
Yeah.
how you respond to clients or to, you know,
Yeah.
project
So the
managers or
the generosity of inviting someone along, I think, is something I'll practice more. Having talked to you.
well, thank you, Carol, because I have a saying every year. I'm a new grandmother, and so
Aw.
it's April, and I haven't updated my saying from 2025. So I'm gonna change it to that. Take somebody along with you. Yes.
Oh, I
Okay,
love that.
great. All right. So to wrap up this conversation, I have a lightning round of questions for you. So you don't have to pause on them too long. Um, and we'll just go through the questions. So think about a space that's almost perfectly designed for human connection. Being the pollinator that you are, what kind of space is that?
I still come back to that public library. I feel like it's for me, and maybe it's still a full thing, but it feels welcoming, it feels public, and it feels like you can interact with people in all sorts of different ways.
That's great. And if you haven't been to our renovated MLK, which maybe you have,
Oh,
but
I love it. I love
it's
it.
great, right? It's great.
It's
Yeah.
great. And the variety of spaces in it and the roof terrace, oh, it's amazing in
Yeah.
Washington, DC.
Amazing. Yeah.
What is it?
Um,
F Street?
it's F. Yeah. F and ninth or something like that. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, you're good for not being a native.
I'm working on it.
Okay. Your favorite space between?
Well, when you started talking about space between, I thought of those pocket parks in Manhattan where it's like too small for a real building in between other buildings. There's a lot of them in the theater district where there's a through park. And there's just like a little planting, a little seating. It's in between two very busy streets, but it's that little slice of kind of pause of quiet and humanity and connection to nature. And that's that little slice in a big urban area.
Oh my God. I have something. I just have to bring it up for you because between your first two answers, have you been to the Moshe Safdie Library in Salt Lake City?
I have,
And
in
you know the little
fact.
pockets, those little holes in the wall? Oh my god. That was brilliant. I wanted to put
Yeah.
that in all my projects. So in the library in Salt Lake City that Moshe Safdie designed, in the I guess it's the youth and children's area, he just has holes in the wall, and it's a space I think it was like an ancillary space, quite frankly, between the structure and the vertical walls that became these cute little caves that you just find parents reading to kids or
Well,
kids
like little
hanging
cubby
out, and
holes.
they're little
Yeah,
cubby holes. Yeah, it's so
yeah,
great.
yeah, I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah. Um, okay, one thing you wish architecture school had taught you or teaches that it does not.
Well, I toggle between collaboration because when I was in school, it was so individually focused. It still is a little too individually focused. So everyone's, an individual with their own design project. Some schools are introducing collaboration more, but when you get out in the world, the reality of you working
It's
alone
all
is almost
collaboration.
zero.
Yeah,
you know,
it's all
unless you're
collaboration.
unless you're the architect, engineer, contractor all at the same time. So I think teaching collaboration and the skills of getting along with people and building kind of shared agency and alignment together. And then the other is negotiation. Could we stop complaining about our contracts and just get better at negotiating?
I love that. That's another thing to put on my 2026. Yeah, just get better at negotiating. Okay, well, maybe this is the answer to your next question. The word you
Maybe.
wish clients would use more.
Um, oh wow. Something like shared their hopes for what the building contributes, not just tell you the spaces they need, but share more about how they hope the building makes a better hospital or, creates a culture is more focused. If we could get them to articulate the values they hope the building espouses and articulates to people, I think if they could dream a little bit more around what impact beyond the practical they hope the building offers, I think we would make better buildings. I think we'd imagine more together um, the
I
impact buildings
agree
have on people. So it's a
because
kind of awkward way to say it, but I think you know what I mean.
no,
Yeah,
no, it's spot on because as I say, if you don't dream it at the beginning,
right.
by the end, after all the VE and the restrictions and, all of that, you won't have something great. You gotta dream big and, believe me, it'll get
And I think
it'll whittle its way back to what it
Yeah, I
needs
think
to
of some of the
be.
people I've worked with or even working with like Plato or other architects, like taking time to dream with the client could help them get there. But
Yeah,
sometimes I think we're all too practical and get right down to business as opposed to that ideation phase that's more um, aspirational, I guess.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, complete the sentence. Design fails when
It doesn't consider the people.
And it succeeds when
It embraces the community.
beautiful. All right, you finished that up. So now let's talk about what is happening at AIA. If I'm
Yeah, a
ready
lot.
to get involved, and even if I'm not an architect, what should I do? You said come
Well, come
visit the
visit
new
our
campus.
building. Yep.
Yeah.
If you come to DC, come visit, have a cup of coffee, go through the gallery, buy some AA swag or a book about architecture or a book to read children about architecture in our shop. Celebrate DC Climate Week. There's going to be events at the AA headquarters. Go on our website and browse around. Go Google AIA by design and watch a couple of the episodes to learn more about design. And then there's a lot of convening activities. There's also New York Climate Week. Um, there's our annual conference, which is in San Diego. There's going to be um, Community
And when is
Action
that,
Beach
Carol?
Cleanup.
Remind everybody.
It is the second week of June in San Diego. Students can go for $35. You can
It's a
volunteer
great
and go
deal.
for free. It's a big celebration, and there will be a lot on our website about the award winners and the keynote speakers. And it's really designed as a gathering to celebrate design and celebrate architecture, but also inspire people. So that's really exciting. We're planning a regenerative design summit for probably the fall to really learn about disaster risk recovery and how to um, prepare our communities for a more dynamic future, but one that's more grounded in community and um, a sort of framework for thinking that goes beyond just the building into the community and all that it represents. And then wraps up with the Women's Leadership Summit in November in Kansas City. So empowering women leaders and exposing them to each other and building community, basically.
That's great. Well, we'll get everybody primed because SEGD will be in Kansas City for our annual conference in October. So we'll we'll
Yeah,
get
we'll
everybody
warm up Kansas
excited.
City.
Yeah, we'll warm up Kansas City. Carol, I'm just so thankful for your generosity and your vision and your heart and what you bring to such an important role, not just in architecture, but in design and in leadership at the right moment. And I'm just so thankful to have gotten to spend this time with you. And eventually we'll have coffee at the AIA headquarters and I'll get some swag for my
Yeah,
granddaughter.
absolutely. Yeah, great books. Yeah. Well, such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, great. Thank you.